listening to Living with ADHD and CPTSD, available on Apple and wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Living with ADHD and CPTSD. Today we are going to discuss Structural Dissociation Theory. I've been wanting to talk about this for quite some time now. And, well, just haven't had the chance. I also haven't felt for the longest time that it was the right time to introduce this, but I am a heavy believer in the structural dissociation theory because I find, and I have personal experience, plus someone that I know and care about very deeply also has experience with structural dissociation theory and the effectiveness of it when it comes to CPTSD and flashbacks and trauma. So, what is structural dissociation theory? Well, it's pretty simple, but let's go through the introduction and I'll read some stuff here and then we'll go and talk about my own experiences and what it can do and such. Okay, so dissociation is the process of emotional distancing, often experienced by people undergoing a traumatic experience. It is also commonly experienced by clients during an abreaction to the trauma. This is distinct from dissociative disorders, a much more serious condition characterized by splitting of the personality into parts, structural dissociation. Excuse me. What follows is an account of the theory of structural dissociation described in The Haunted Self, the classic text on this subject. For those who have the time, we recommend reading the full text, which is 400 pages long, if possible. Wow. For those who are currently unable to do so, our aim is to introduce you to the main ideas of the theory and to encourage you to dig deeper into this important subject. In this account, we have kept to the terminology used in The Haunted Self. Dissociation, a survival strategy. Faced with abuse and neglect, children need to find some way of surviving psychologically. Abused children make use of the brain's capacity to split into parts. There may be a good child who gets on with normal life as best as he or she can, and who disowns the bad child to whom the abuse and neglect happened as not me. The structural dissociation model of personality posits splitting as an adaptive response to the demands of a traumatic environment. Moreover, it proposes that this response is based on the left brain, right brain split that supports disowning of the not me or trauma-related parts and supports the ability to function without awareness of being traumatized. This phobic avoidance between parts is a key characteristic of structural dissociation, and insensitivity to this by therapists seeking to treat trauma can be a cause of patients not returning to therapy. Splitting causes the development of parts driven by animal defensives that are crucial to survival. The trauma-related parts, activated by normal life stimuli and driven by implicit trauma responses, may experience threat or danger and automatically engage in defensive behaviors such as fight, flight, freeze, submit, and cry for help, even when the threat of danger is long past. Survival, but at a cost. While this is a valuable survival strategy, it also comes at a cost. To keep the rejected part out of the way long after the traumatic events have occurred, individuals must rely on dissociation, denial, and/or self-hatred for enforcing the disconnection. In the end, they have survived trauma by disowning the most vulnerable and hurting parts of themselves. Although the term parts of the personality is a controversial concept in the mental health world, we will continue to use it in the videos you will see. Well, there are no videos, of course. There are three reasons for doing so. First, use of the term does suggest there is a whole person with whom we are working as therapists. Second, the term is in common usage. Who has not said something like, part of me wants an ice cream, and part of me says no, not today. So, it is easily understood by clients, at least in Western culture. Third, there is evidence that the brain develops neural networks that consist of neural pathways that consistently fire together, and that these neural systems can encode complex systems of traits or systems that represent aspects of our personalities or ways of being. In other words, a part may be represented by one of these networks as a physical reality in the brain of an adult. Such neural systems can be complex with a subjective sense of identity, or can be a much simpler collection of traits associated with different roles played by the individual. This is consistent with what most of us working with parts will have experienced. Some parts have a definite sense of identity and are quite elaborate in their ability to communicate, while others are much less so. All right, outline of the structural dissociation model. The structural dissociation model hypothesizes that there are three types of structures that develop as a result of trauma. 1. Primary structural dissociation is the simplest division of the personality. There are just two parts. First, there is an apparently normal part that carries out the action systems crucial to getting on with life, and the other part is called the emotional part, which holds the feelings and memories of the trauma and the mammalian defensive reactions related to it, including fight, flight, and freeze or tonic immobility, otherwise playing dead. This division seems to evolve most often in consequence of a single traumatizing event, although it can be observed in childhood abuse survivors in a form of the inner child phenomenon. Primary structural dissociation is characteristic of simple trauma-related disorders, such as simple forms of PTSD and some conversion disorders, a mental condition in which a person has blindness, paralysis, or other nervous system neurologic symptoms that cannot be explained by medical evaluation. In primary structural dissociation, the ANP is the major stakeholder of the personality and maintains executive control most of the time. It carries out adult action systems crucial to the survival, such as exploration, attachment, caretaking, and sexuality. The EP is most of the time not in control, but can take full executive control during a flashback in which orientation to the present is lost and the person is in a full reliving of an earlier trauma. An EP is a psychological structure that is a separate, dissociated biopsychosocial subsystem with a reactivated traumatic memories that may involve feelings, various sensory perceptions, or strongly held beliefs. In cases of PTSD, EPs are thought to be more rudimentary than in cases of secondary and tertiary dissociation. 2. Secondary structural dissociation is more complex and develops when traumatization is prolonged and repeated. The range of complexity can be very significant. The simplest form consists of two EPs and one ANP that involves the majority of the functioning of the personality. Other traumatized individuals become much more divided, with several to many EPs. These EPs may be present in various forms and may have quite varied degrees of separateness, autonomy, and elaborated characteristics such as name, age, and gender. 3. Tertiary structural dissociation involves not only more than one EP, but also more than one ANP part. The model proposes that this form of dissociation is characteristic of dissociative identity disorder, or DID. In such cases, the action systems crucial to getting on with life, such as exploration, attachment, caretaking, and sexuality, which are found in a single AMP and primary and secondary structural dissociation, are now divided among two or more AMPs. As in some cases of secondary structural dissociation, some EPs may be more complex and autonomous, appear in daily life, and take over full executive control other than simply defense. Trauma-related symptoms. Most trauma survivors have a range of symptoms. Even those with simple PTSD from a single incident trauma may have symptoms that go far beyond avoidance, re-experiencing, and hyperarousal, reflecting a range of somatic, cognitive, affective, and behavioral effects of psychological trauma. Often, dissociation is viewed as simply one of many symptoms rather than as an underlying organization of symptoms. In this summary, we assume the latter, although it can be difficult to decide whether or not a particular phenomenon is a manifestation of structural dissociation or whether it is something else. For example, a different sense of self may be due to depression, exhaustion, intoxication, or structural dissociation. The proof that symptoms are related to structural dissociation lies in showing that one part of the personality recalls a memory or experience that another part does not. There are two classes of symptoms. Negative dissociative symptoms relate to the loss of mental abilities, such as perceptions, affects, memories, ability to focus, and so on. Their counterpart consists of positive dissociative symptoms, such as intrusions of traumatic memories and voices. It's been noted that negative symptoms are more persistent and permanent over time from the perspective of the apparent normal part of the personality, which has executive control most of the time. Positive symptoms tend to come and go with the intrusion of an emotional part of the personality into ANP. They include the intrusion symptoms of PTSD and other trauma-related disorders. In more complex cases, EPs may intrude into each other, and one ANP may intrude into another ANP in cases of DID. While symptoms of structural dissociation may be understood as positive or negative, they can also be understood as symptoms that show up in two ways. Mentally, as psychoform dissociative symptoms, in the body, as somatoform dissociative symptoms. Both psychoform and somatoform symptoms can be experienced by one part of the personality and not by another. This table shows a summary of how these ways of understanding symptoms can be brought together. It links the psychoform and the somatoform symptoms with the negative and positive dissociative forms. I am going to show this, of course, in the link. So when you go to listen to the episode, it'll be here. All right, type of symptom, negative dissociative symptoms, psychoform symptoms, dissociative amnesia, associated with chronic childhood abuse and neglect, especially if the abuser is a close relative or carer. Loss of critical thinking. Critical thinking requires recognition of details and nuances, often impaired in trauma survivors. The ability may be available to certain parts of personality, but less so to other parts. Loss of mental skills. Cognitive impairment includes problems with memory, concentration, attention, planning, and judgment. Loss of affect. Affect dysregulation is common in traumatized clients. It may occur because of switching among parts of the personality that experience diverse effects that are not integrated with each other. There may be a degree of emotional numbing in the present, so clients as AMP may complain of feeling two-dimensional. It may also be an absence of emotion regarding the traumatic event. Example, total submission. Loss of needs, wishes, and fantasies. Survivors as ANP may have dissociated not only painful emotions, but also painful needs for attachment or wishes such as yearning for a good parent. These needs are often held by childlike EPs. Somatoform symptoms. Loss of motor function. Temporary or more permanent loss may include partial or total paralysis of limbs or the entire body, contractures, poor coordination, sudden loss of muscle tension, and loss of hearing, smell, taste, vision, or speech. May occur in survivor as AMP or in an EP fixated in freeze or in total submission. Loss of skills. Loss of skills can be both mental and behavioral actions. When an EP has complete executive control, daily life skills of the AMP can often be missing. Loss of sensation. Loss or diminution of sensation is a common feature of traumatized individuals. Loss may include sense of touch, pressure, temperature, pain, movement, arousal, or other physical signals such as hunger or fatigue. Other manifestations include partial or complete loss of hearing, vision, taste, and smell. Okay, there were a few more, but I didn't want to read them all. Okay, so that's as much as I'm going to read from that, because it's pretty, just goes further on to it. So, but I'm going to talk about more related to personal experience and be more broad about it and discuss it a little bit more. But before that, I'm going to take a break, and then when I come back, we'll continue. All right, talk to you then. All right, so I've talked about briefly in the past episodes that I recorded about things like multiple parts. I've actually named my parts, and I've discussed it here. And I did an episode a while ago on the birth of a part. And these parts, as it was said in the article that I read briefly here, a lot of these parts are born at different times or points of your life. And they each have like their own identity, and you can even, like, if you investigate as you're doing your processing and you're doing your 4-step processing, that is, eventually you get to when you're doing therapy and you're learning about it, is you are trying to identify, like, you want to find who they are. Like, you give them a name, you can give them an age, and even unbeknownst to me, they can have a different gender as well. And the purpose is to kind of like start a relationship. Well, it is, you're starting a relationship with the part. And the strategy and the idea of it is that you want to learn where they came from and why they are, and then you also, of course, you're trying to figure out their feeling, like their emotions. You're understanding and you're feeling what they are, that they went through, why they're here, their purpose in being alive or being like who they are for you. And through that, you go and you are trying to strengthen and connect, reestablish a neurological connection between the adult part, or the ANP as is in the article, and the child part. And the idea is to gain their trust and strengthen the neurological bond between you and that part. And over time, like this, and keep in mind, this isn't done like in a day or a week or anything like that. This is over multiple sessions where you sit down and you talk, like you introduce, you listen to the part, you find how they're feeling, you feel their emotions, without getting blended with that part, you experience how they feel, what their emotions are, their purpose. You're doing this multiple times, and you can do this, like a lot of times you do this multiple times in a day, over the period of the day. You can do it after a traumatic event or a flashback of your trauma, or you do it even when you're having a good part of your day where you're not feeling any trauma and you're feeling grounded. So their whole purpose is to experience their feelings, their emotions, and then after you've identified them, then the next step is to try and gain their trust. So you want them to, and over time, the parts will learn to trust the adult, of course. And so eventually, once you have gained their trust, then you can learn to update them. And so you basically, the step is that you show them like kindness, you show them compassion, you show them love, you give them what they did not get, that was not given to them when they were at the age that they were born. So if you have a part that's 6 years old and they were neglected repeatedly and never taken care of, or not felt love, or they weren't told I love you, or they never got hugs, there's multiple different things that they could have experienced chronically over their life, over that time period, that caused them to feel the pain and the experiences, right? So the purpose is to show them that they are missing, or that they didn't receive, or to give them what they didn't receive when they were that age. And so you're updating them, and you're like, simple thing, you tell them that you thank them for what they've done, that they've protected you, and you show them love, and you show them compassion and kindness and understanding. And it's like being a parent to a child. It's basically the same thing. And then what you do after, over the time that you're doing this repeatedly, of course, is you show them that today is actually, like, you could give them the date. So for example, today I'll say, okay, so, all right, the part today is March 24th, 2022. I am now 44, and I am no longer in danger. I am no longer being neglected. I feel love, and I feel happiness, and I take care of myself. I am responsible for whether or not I feel love, and I feel kindness, and I get compassion, and I am looked after. And you are now safe. You no longer are under threat. You're no longer in danger of being harmed or neglected. And this process, multiple times, is how you eventually will build that stronger neurological connection, like I've said already, between you and that child part. And over the years, the months and the years that you do this processing, and you do the therapy work, and you work with these parts, that they gain that level of trust, that at some point down the road, that if you do experience a flashback to that event that they're from, or for that just for that one part, for example, that you as the adult will be able to stay in control, and you may feel a trigger, but you'll be able to be strong enough to recover from that, and that you won't feel, or you hope, the idea is that you won't feel the pain and be out of time and place, and experience all the anguish and the hurt and the fear that you experienced as that child at that age. That's the way that it's supposed to go towards it, and eventually. Now the thing is as they were describing and explaining in this article, is that you could, depending on the severity, you can have multiple parts. A lot of people who have the CPTSD and have it's pretty rare to have just one. You're going to have multiple parts. Like, I know on my own personal level, I think I know of 10, 12 parts of my own, and I've come to learn. I don't necessarily learn them. I didn't know of them or discover them all at the same time. They were discovered in the near 3 years that I've been doing this, they have been discovered at different times or at different dates and in different ways. Like, I've got a time part. I've got I should have had my book here, unfortunately, but I don't. I've got many different parts with many different names, and they have different ages of where in my life when they were born, and I need to update them, process with each part, both in times of recovering from flashback from trauma, and as well as in a good time when I'm not feeling that, and I'm feeling grounded, and I'm feeling, in a good state of being. So you have to work with each of these parts, and some will be core parts, some will be secondary, they kind of attach to other parts. Like, so imagine like a graph or a chart where you've got a flow chart or something similar, and you've got like parent parts, or parts that are like the primary ones that are really core base parts, and then you have parts that are attached to them, multiple parts that could be attached to the one or two or three core parts, and they all need to be on their own time, and maybe a couple of them together if they're willing to trust you, and they're willing to listen, and willing to talk about what's going on. They will all need to be updated and processed, and you need to build the neurological pathways with each of those parts in your mind, in your brain, so that it is a fluid establishment, so that like I said, if you do have a trigger in the future at some point, with all the work that you do, is that you won't necessarily feel lost and the child part take over and be in control, because the goal is to have the adult be there, the part fully trusting them, so that when the trigger does occur and you are experiencing a flashback, that the part will feel safe and trust the adult, that adult will know what to do and know how to take care of them, and that you'll take some time, and you'll know that you need to step away for a little bit of time, and you need to process with them and update, and and then recover from that flashback quicker, and possibly not experience a trigger eventually down the road if you do the work, which for a lot of people who suffer from CPTSD can take 5-10 years for work to truly be effective and to see a lot of significant improvement. So it is something that has to be done repeatedly, and in order for it to be effective and to really gain the strengthening of the neurological binding between the adult and that child part, and of course the multiple child parts. So that's the idea of that. So I'm going to read something here. It's relating to some of the work. Okay, so this is an introduction to treatment interventions. So in chronically traumatized individuals, there is a phase-oriented treatment as described by someone called Pierre Janet more than a century ago, and is required, and this involves 3 phases. So phase 1 is stabilization and symptom reduction, including an emphasis on skill building and improvement in mental level. Then phase 2 is treatment of traumatic memories, including addressing the typical phobic avoidance between parts prior to any trauma processing with EMDR. And then phase 3 is personality reintegration and rehabilitation. Oh, that's a tough word sometimes. The phase treatment can be applied in a straightforward way in less complicated cases of secondary dissociation. But however, in most cases of secondary and tertiary structural dissociation, treatment is long-term, and the phase-oriented model moves back and forth between the phases. And phase 2 will periodically alternate with phase 1, Later in therapy, phase 2 and even phase 1 will be alternated with phase 3 work. And this makes therapeutic relationships central to the entire process, as the therapist needs to understand, respect, and work with the constraints of the mental level of the patient and his or her dissociative parts of the personality. Okay, so there we go. It's a lot of work, obviously, and it can be probably one of the hardest things, if not the hardest thing that you will ever do. Because if you do want to heal and you do want to be able to, when flashbacks occur at any point, when you experience a trigger, that you want to be able to maintain control of the adult and not be blended with the child part, because child parts behave in a certain way and they only know that one behavior. And if they're, out there triggered and the adult is blended with those parts and they're talking on behalf of the part, they often can do things or say things that are inadvertently disrespectful or rude or mean. There's a lot of things that can occur if the part is in control and not the adult or the ANP. It's really unfortunate when that does happen. I've had plenty of experiences with being blended and getting triggered, and the difficulties in my own life of learning how to even notice that it's happening, like to notice that there's a trigger going on, and then learning how to correctly process the four-step processing that is required. A lot of times, and it is a well-known thing, that you can be in step 1 leading towards step 2 for a long period of time, because it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of patience and care and compassion and love with those parts to gain their trust. Because without gaining their trust, it is not possible to update them. You can't update a part that doesn't trust the adult. If there's no neurological connection involved, like if the neuron, like there's no connection, there's no plastic, the rebuilding of those pathways in the brain, it's next to impossible to update the part, to show them that we are now today instead of in the past when that's their time. That's when they think they are. The parts are out of time and out of place when they come online. And so they don't know that the adult is actually whatever it, for me example, they don't know that I am actually 44 and that I'm living in 2022 and that I have like a career. I live in a house with my girlfriend and I have all these responsibilities and that I've done a lot of work and a lot of improvement. They don't necessarily realize that. And so it's up to us with the processing to get to that stage eventually, so that they are aware and they know that they are safe and that the adult is in control and is taking care of them, instead of them feeling in danger every time they get triggered. It's so much work and it requires a lot of time, and there may often be a lot of times where you do the work and you listen to them, you experience and feel the emotions that your parts are feeling, and they're describing to you what's going on and what is happening, but they're not ready to go past stage 2, or maybe not even like stage 1. There's a lot of work involved, and you have to go slow at times, and you have to repeatedly do it. Like every couple hours you have to update, and you have to restart the process and do stage 1 or step 1, and then maybe get to step 2. And if you can't get to step 3, maybe one of those times you'll be able to be fortunate enough where you can update them. you know, it's very rewarding when you do get to that point, but it does take a lot of work. Okay, if you do have any other questions, or there's something maybe that you want to learn, or you want to understand further about structural dissociation theory, there is a lot of, well, there's not a ton, but there are some like articles and websites out there that do discuss it. It is a relatively new theory, and unfortunately there are not a lot of therapists or psychologists that work with it right now because it's still not widely known, but it is an effective form of therapy, and it does work. I would, if you believe that this is something that is happening with you, that you are dissociating, and that you feel like, you have times where you don't remember doing something, or you feel like you were there with your system when something was occurring, and you got it like a flashback and you feel triggered, then this could very well be what you're looking for as an effective form of therapy and healing. So I would definitely look into, you could do some research online, and then you could search see if there are any therapists in your area that do structural dissociation theory. You could even look and see if there are any that do Zoom appointments or remote appointments as well. You don't necessarily have to be restricted to your city that you live in, but take a look. You might be able to find a therapist that can help you, and be on your way to healing through the structural dissociation theory model. I recommend it. It is very important, and it is definitely an effective way of starting the healing process from complex trauma. Okay, one thing I would like to discuss before I do end this episode is that there is plenty of evidence out there that other therapies that therapists use for people who suffer from complex trauma can be damaging. CBT has potential to be damaging to a client who is suffering from complex CPTSD, because the theories and the work that they are doing with the client definitely has potential to be damaging rather than healing for that person. There are a lot of the theories out there are based on ideas that people don't have parts, that people need to shut down an ego part and tell that part that it's wrong all the time, and to try and shut it up, basically. And this is, in my opinion, a very incorrect idea to be treating people who have trauma and have child parts that were born to protect you in your past, to tell those parts that what they're doing is wrong and that they're bad or that they're evil. This is something you do not want to do with your child parts. This is further damaging. And instead of healing and gaining your trust, your parts are going to rebel further and are going to think that you are not trustworthy. And the amount of work that will be involved in healing those parts to trust the adult again will be a very long and tedious journey, and in some cases could be even irreparable. It's not a safe way to do it. You need to always be there for your parts and to treat them with kindness and with compassion and grace and patience, and be there for them. Telling a part that they're incorrect or that they're wrong and that they're bad and shaming that part is very damaging and the opposite effect of what you want for your system to heal and to move forward from CPTSD. There are other therapies out there that aren't necessarily damaging, but also don't do any good because they don't reach the root of the cause, which is the fact that the child parts are born to protect you. And the only real way to be able to access those child parts is to, like I said earlier, is to get neurological connections and to rebuild that connection by gaining their trust and by updating them and informing them of the present day. So if you currently are doing CBT therapy and you find that you aren't making any progress, or you feel like you're getting worse, or that you're not gaining any ground, you need to seriously rethink what you're doing. You need to look at the root of what is happening, and you need to question your therapist and your therapy. I really recommend and really advise that you should look at structural dissociation theory and parts work, because it is more effective and it is more helpful. There is direct evidence. Like, I know it is just one person. I'm not saying that one person, it means that this is fact, truth, 100%, and that there's no argument or any defense necessarily. But I know someone who took many, many years of CBT therapy and learned at the end, when they re-experienced their trauma despite all the years of the therapy, and then went to a new therapist who tried using the structural dissociation theory model on her, and learned that all the work that was done from the previous therapist using CBT was negative, had a negative impact on her health, on her healing experience, and she basically had to start over, which is not good, because that's a waste of money and that's a waste of time and years of therapy that basically really didn't do her any good. So do your research. Be thorough with yourself when it comes to finding the research. I highly recommend, and I really am very adamant that I think you should look into structural dissociation theory as a method and a way of healing from your trauma and your flashbacks. Because if you seriously look deep down inside yourself, you will see that you do have child parts. And if you talk to a therapist who uses structural dissociation theory, they will be able to see that right away and recommend this therapy for you to further your healing. It's really important. And I have, like I said, personal experience with this that backs this up. And I hope that you take this advice and use it for your good and gain in your process of healing from CPTSD. Okay, everybody, that is this episode. I hope it was really helpful. I hope you got a lot out of it. Check me out. I am on Twitter. It's at ADHD and CPTSD. You can check out my website, which is www.livingwithadhdandcptsd.ca. You can give me support. Go to ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com. I would really appreciate if you would support me with my podcast. If you do really enjoy this and you find that this is a very informative and very helpful podcast, then give me support. I would appreciate it. Any amount is great, but it would be helpful. The link to the model, the structural dissociation model, will be in the description of the show. And I really hope you guys take a serious look at it and check it out for yourself. If you have any questions, give me a shout on Twitter. And you can contact me on my website, of course. All right, everybody. That's it for today. See you next week. Bye for now.